Okay, let's unpack this. Because, if your car engine is failing, a bright red check engine light just flashes on your dashboard, right? It's literally impossible to ignore.
Yeah, you pull over immediately. It's a clear warning.
Exactly. But if a child's nervous system is failing, there's no light, there's no glowing indicator, there's just, a sudden stomach ache right before the school bus arrives, or a perfectly quiet kid just staring blankly at a math test.
Which is so easy for adults to just miss entirely.
Right. And so, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are decoding the hidden signs of childhood anxiety that just constantly fly under the radar. We're pulling all our info from the MentalSpace Guide to Childhood Generalized Anxiety Disorder.
Such a vital text.
It really is. And our mission today is to understand not just how this condition masks itself, but how school districts, specifically in Georgia, are building this amazing systemic in-house safety net to tackle it head on.
Because it's really a fundamental shift in how we evaluate student well-being. The text pushes us to, stop looking purely at those surface behaviors and start actually examining the profound emotional mechanisms underneath.
Yeah, and the sheer scale of this is what sets the stakes right away. I mean, the guide reveals that nearly 1 in 12 children are affected by childhood generalized anxiety disorder, or, GAD.
1 in 12. That's a massive footprint.
Right. You walk down a K-12 hallway, you look into literally any given classroom, and that is 2 or 3 kids per room.
Yeah, and given that you, our listener, probably already understands the basics of situational anxiety, we don't need to retread the difference between, normal nervousness and a full-blown disorder.
Yeah, we can skip the basics.
Right. What the source material emphasizes about GAD is the neurobiological state of the child. It's not just a transient reaction to a test, it's this ambient static of fear.
Ambient static. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because their nervous system is just blocked. Overwhelming concerns about school performance, intense worries about friendships, or, and this is a big one, deep-seated fears about their family's physical safety. It's all constantly running in the background.
Which honestly sets up this immediate contradiction in the source text, because if this heavy static of fear is affecting 1 in 12 kids, how can the text explicitly state that GAD is among the most underdiagnosed K-12 conditions?
It sounds like the math doesn't work.
Exactly. If it's literally everywhere, K-12 staff should be seeing it everywhere. Why aren't they?
Well, they aren't seeing it because the condition effectively disguises itself as compliance. The text refers to this as the good kid paradox.
The good kid paradox.
Yeah, think about a typical classroom. The adults are just inevitably drawn to the loudest problems, right? If a student's throwing chairs or disrupting a lesson, they get immediate attention. And eventually, an intervention.
Yeah, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Exactly. But the child with GAD often presents as the exact opposite of that.
Right. They are desperately anxious to get everything perfect, so they never break the rules. They're quiet. They're the kids the teacher literally never has to discipline.
Which is why they fly completely under the radar.
It's heartbreaking, because beneath that quiet surface, they are silently withdrawing socially, and they're really struggling academically. And to break through that disguise, the guide outlines 3 specific clinical signs that school staff really need to watch for.
Yes, the physical and behavioral tell.
Exactly. So let's look at the first one. Chronic somatic complaints. Basically the stomach aches, the headaches, even physical signs like muscle tension, restlessness, trouble sleeping.
And what's fascinating here is how we have to look at the mechanism behind those physical symptoms. Because the anxiety is literally tricking the adults in the room by manifesting as a physical illness.
Tricking them how? Exactly.
Well, when a child's brain is locked in generalized anxiety, their autonomic nervous system is just constantly flooding their body with stress hormones, like cortisol.
Oh, wow. So they're just soaking in stress hormones.
Yeah, and that fight or flight response has a very real, measurable physiological impact on their gut-brain axis and their muscular system. So when that quote-unquote good kid is sitting in the nurse's office for the 4th time in a week with a stomachache.
It's not a ploy to get out of class.
Exactly. The pain is entirely real.
But the adults treat the stomach. They give the kid a saltine cracker, let them rest on the cot for 10 minutes, and just send them back to class, completely missing the invisible neurological alarm bell that's actually causing it.
Right. The symptom is managed, but the root cause is completely ignored, leaving the child to just endure the physical toll of their anxiety day after day.
Gosh. Okay, so the second sign the text highlights is excessive reassurance seeking, like the student who needs the teacher to confirm they're doing the assignment right every 5 minutes.
The constant need for validation, yes.
Yeah. But it's the third sign where things get really complicated, I think. Perfectionism that paralyzes participation. And honestly, in a super competitive academic environment, I can see why this gets missed. Isn't a little perfectionism normal? Don't we want kids to strive?
That is probably the most common misinterpretation K-12 educators make. We mistake a clinical symptom for academic dedication. But the text makes it very clear that there's a massive gulf between healthy striving and clinical perfectionism.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this, and the best way I can conceptualize that difference is to go back to that car analogy from the beginning.
Okay, let's hear it.
So healthy striving is like a well-tuned engine, right?
Yeah.
It gives a student the productive energy to study hard or practice an instrument. It propels them forward.
Right, it's productive fuel.
Exactly. But the paralyzing perfectionism in this guide, that's like trying to drive a car with a stuck emergency brake. The kid is so terrified of making a single mistake that the fear of getting it wrong literally paralyzes them. They won't raise their hand. They won't even start a project. When the fear stops the car from moving entirely, that's the danger zone. That's clinical.
That is a perfect analogy. And to take the mechanics of that a step further, the friction you're describing from that stuck brake, that's the cortisol flooding their system.
Oh, wow.
They are burning immense amounts of fuel just trying to maintain their composure. They're exhausted before they even step off the school bus in the morning.
That sounds absolutely exhausting.
It is. And because these physical and behavioral symptoms are actually neurological alarm bells, you can't just treat the stomachache or tell them to stop worrying. You have to treat the nervous system itself.
Which leads us to how these K-12 schools are actually intervening. And I gotta say, the source text is incredibly optimistic on this front. It explicitly states that GAD responds exceptionally well to early intervention.
It really does. It doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence.
Right. If it's caught, kids don't have to just suffer silently. The primary evidence-based framework they highlight is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
The gold standard.
Yep. They do also mention medication as a viable treatment, but they place like really strict guardrails around it. Medication is only utilized when clinically indicated, and a formal diagnosis must always be made by a licensed clinician.
And those guardrails are vital. The text isn't asking K-12 teachers to suddenly become diagnosticians or therapists. It's just asking them to act as the early warning system so the child gets routed to a professional.
Right, spotting the signs.
Exactly. And the reason CBT is positioned as the primary framework here is because of how it functions mechanically. We talked about treating the stomachache with a cracker, right? That's just a Band-Aid. CBT attacks the root of the worry.
Because it actually gives the child the tools to, like, rewire that ambient static of fear we talked about.
It does. A child with GAD might have this persistent, catastrophic thought like, if I answer this question wrong, everyone will laugh and I'll fail the entire grade.
A total spiral.
Right. CBT teaches them to catch that thought, examine the evidence for it, and actively restructure it. It's a cognitive tool set that allows the child to lower their own emergency brake, essentially.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at the logistics in the text, it seems like the traditional outpatient model of therapy just completely clashes with the modern K-12 school day.
Oh, it's a massive friction point.
Right. I mean, think about it from a parent's perspective. You somehow notice the hidden signs, you manage to find a licensed therapist who actually has an opening, which is rare, and then what? You have to pull your kid out of math class every Tuesday morning, drive across town, sit in a waiting room, and drive him back.
It's incredibly disruptive.
It's a logistical nightmare. It relies on parents having super flexible jobs and reliable transportation. It looks like the only way around this systemic bottleneck is to somehow just bring the therapy to the school itself.
It is really the only viable path forward. The traditional model features barriers to care that are frankly insurmountable for a lot of families. If the goal is early intervention for 1 in 12 students, the delivery system has to exist where the students already spend most of their waking hours.
Which bridges us directly to the systemic solution the text focuses on, the MentalSpace school model. This is an organization actively partnering with school districts in Georgia to completely bypass that whole logistical nightmare.
And they're doing it very effectively.
They really are. Let's break down how they actually execute this, because they offer K-12 mental health support directly to these schools, and the core of their model is same-day teletherapy. They actually assign dedicated therapist teams to specific schools to ensure continuity of care.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text points out a crucial detail about those teams. They are licensed, diverse, and culturally competent therapists.
Why is that specifically so important for this?
Well, when you're dealing with a child who is deeply entrenched in generalized anxiety, trust is the absolute prerequisite for any cognitive restructuring to actually happen. Having a diverse team ensures that students are far more likely to find a therapeutic match where they feel understood on a cultural and personal level.
That makes a ton of sense. And they aren't just doing one-on-one sessions either. They are building a complete wraparound service. The text lists their scope as going well beyond individual therapy to include crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention, staff wellness programs, and even family counseling.
It's a very comprehensive safety net.
Yeah, and for the administrators listening to this, the guide highlights the critical compliance factors too. MentalSpace is fully HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
Which is an enormous administrative hurdle for schools. Trying to merge the strict privacy laws of healthcare HIPAA with the equally strict privacy laws surrounding student education records, FERPA is just incredibly complex.
I can only imagine the paperwork.
Right. So by ensuring compliance across both frameworks, MentalSpace just removes the legal friction that often prevents schools from offering in-house care in the first place.
Plus, the text explicitly notes that their model helps Georgia schools meet the upcoming HB 268 compliance deadline hitting in July 2026, which mandates certain mental health and safety protocols for K-12 systems in the state.
That's a looming deadline for a lot of districts.
Definitely. And for schools needing to navigate that, the guide actually provides their direct contact info. It's mentalspaceschool.com, and the email is mentalspaceschool@chillerspeetherapy.com. But I have to raise a major logistical hurdle here. Cost.
Always the elephant in the room.
Right. It's great to say we're bringing therapy to the school, but if it's hidden behind this impossible paywall for the families, it doesn't really solve the systemic issue, does it?
Wait, isn't therapy incredibly expensive for families? How are they affording this?
You're right to ask that. Access is really just an illusion if the financial burden falls heavily on the parents, particularly in districts with wide economic disparities. But the source text outlines a really unique financial structure here. For Medicaid patients, the cost is exactly $0. Free.
Which is huge.
Huge. And to cover the rest of the student body, they've partnered with an extensive range of private insurance providers. The text lists Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and Amerigroup.
That covers a vast majority of the population.
Yeah. They've effectively unified this very fragmented K-12 healthcare landscape by removing the financial barrier at the exact same time they removed the transportation barrier.
Which transforms the entire K-12 mental health ecosystem. It shifts it from a reactive exclusionary model to a proactive inclusive one. A student just goes to a designated private space within their own school building, logs on for their evidence-based CBT session, and then walks right back into their education.
Wow. Okay, so we've mapped out the hidden symptoms, we know the clinical mechanism of CBT, and we understand how this mental space delivery model operates logistically and financially. The final piece of the puzzle here is the ROI. Does this systemic intervention actually work?
This raises an important question, really. We so often treat education and healthcare as two completely separate silos, as if a child's brain just, leaves its body when it enters a classroom.
Right, like they're totally disconnected.
Exactly. But a child's neurobiology entirely dictates their capacity to learn.
And the outcome statistics from the MentalSpace model make that connection undeniable. Following their interventions, the text reports an 89% improved attendance rate.
89%.
Yeah. And they see a 92% reduction in anxiety symptoms, along with an 85% family satisfaction rate. That 89% spike in attendance is just massive for a K-12 district.
It's a profound shift. And if we look back at the mechanisms we discussed earlier, it's just the logical result of treating the root cause. You literally cannot teach a child whose nervous system is stuck in fight or flight survival mode.
So what does this all mean? To really visualize how that 89% attendance improvement happens, I think about it like fixing the foundation of a house.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, for years, educators might assume a chronically absent or withdrawn student just doesn't want to learn. They're just focused on the cracks in the drywall, the truancy, the missing homework.
Blaming the student for the symptom.
Right. But the foundation of that house is crumbling from anxiety, the paralyzing perfectionism, the chronic stomach aches. That's a foundational structural failure. What the mental space model proves is that CBT fixes the foundation. Once you manage the GUD and stabilize that foundation, the house, meaning their attendance, their academics, their family life, naturally stands taller. The child actually wants to go to school because the environment isn't physically and emotionally painful to them anymore.
Beautifully put. The focus of the school fundamentally shifts from penalizing the symptom to structurally supporting the child so they can thrive.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I really want to leave you with a clear picture of what this means for your community. We've explored a landscape that is so often invisible in K-12 hallways.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. We've seen how childhood generalized anxiety disorder masquerades as the compliant good kid, or gets brushed off as just another chronic stomachache. But the takeaway from this guide is highly actionable. When school staff are trained to spot the signs, and when schools deploy these accessible systemic safety nets like MentalSpace to provide same-day care in Georgia, the entire paradigm
It
shifts.
changes everything.
Children don't have to suffer silently while their parents navigate a broken K-12 outpatient system. The clinical tools work, and the delivery system is finally adapting to where the kids actually are.
But as we recognize that incredible progress, I do want to leave you with something to consider long after we finish today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We know today that 1 in 12 children carry this heavy, invisible burden of generalized anxiety disorder. And we know they are often praised simply for being that quiet, good kid. It really forces you to look around and wonder,
Yeah.
how many adults walking around today, maybe sitting in your office or even in your own home, are just former good kids who never got the CBT they desperately needed?
Oh, wow.
What would our adult world look like today if every school had a system like this 20 years ago?
Man, that really reframes how you look at the adults around you. It makes you wonder how many people are still, driving with the emergency brake on, burning through all their energy just because nobody ever taught them how to release it in the third grade. Next time you see someone struggling, or even if you notice that inexplicable tension in yourself, just remember that the warning signs don't always look the way we expect them to. Pay attention to the invisible alarm bells, however they show up.